Now, part two. I'm going to go into a very kind of specific example about, again, convincing other people to have new kind of thinking and behavior. I'm not going to generalize much. I'm going to take a very specific example of how to introduce design thinking when people are non-designers. That's going to be, I'm going to show the recipe book that I have in my back pocket. But I'm sure even if you, well, I'm not going to say anything yet. I'm going to make you think about it. But first, this warning sign. Remember, it's okay not to join the breakout. Just don't break out of the lecture, because I'm going to soon use the awesome power of breakout rooms. So let's see how many of you disappear this time. Anyway, I'm going to give you 10 minutes in each breakout room and to discuss that question in the white. We're going to talk about design thinking especially. What is design thinking if you can't use the word design? So if anybody does that, you can slap them on the fingers. Hard to do online, but you get the point. And again, 10 minutes, and again, write 3 to 5 bullets. I'm sure if some of you have no idea what design thinking is all about, fantastic. That person is a perfect audience. But I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept. So how do you explain it? What is it? If you can't say that, well, design thinking is thinking about design. Now, the awesome power of breakout rooms. Welcome back, everybody. I'll move that over there. Some of you already had put here some interesting stuff. Thank you again. By the way, once we get to it, we're going to share these things with you as well. I have a few words about our blog in the end, but let's get this content. So like I said, I'm now going to give, well, I was about to say a very specific example. Yes, in a way, it is very specific, broadly speaking. We're talking about design thinking and introducing that into an organization as a facilitator. But maybe at least in the bubble I live, this is a very typical challenge. If you're a consultant, facilitator, whoever, a lot of these organizational changes and transformations have this whole thing that let's introduce this new way of working. It could be in, agile development. I think that's another branch of how do we introduce these methods and thinking and ways of working on software development teams. Or it could be, classical Six Sigma lean thinking and all that. But I'm sure you can pick between the lines on, and at least this is very, very, very concrete. So not being very vague and generalized. So how do you introduce design thinking? I put kind of service design thinking, if you will, to actually non-designers in a single sprint or a workshop. And kind of tongue in cheek here, in my experience, it's much easier to introduce design thinking to non-designers than designers, because designers are typically so very, very, it becomes a thing about their identity. Non-designers don't have that because they don't identify themselves as designers. Good. Clock. So kind of this was my my simple answer. What is design thinking if you can't use the D word? And I don't know about you, maybe you've had a similar experience. I don't have a design education background myself. I call myself a designer. I've done design work and all that, but I don't have the background. I am a software engineer. So, but I noticed a lot of people build strong identity behind the designer label. And sometimes they have very difficult explaining what they are doing and who they are if they can't use the D word. But I mean, things like these are typically in design thinking. Customer-centric business, there's a technology part, it's creative, playful, co-creation and all that. And I'm pretty sure that in the chat where you're listing, we're getting some of the same, but most probably new stuff as well. Now, the challenge I've been working with many times, especially in large corporations where my experience comes from, is that if you say the word design as a facilitator, then people go something like this. Oh, this is that design thing. I'm not a designer, so I just gonna lock my ears. So that's why I'm really interested in the question, how do you facilitate design thinking if you can't use the D word? So generally speaking, how do you introduce some kind of specific, I called them religion earlier. How do you introduce this specific religion for people who they don't want to change their religion. They don't need new gods to believe in. So here we go. This is in my experience, this has worked. First of all, the whole point of it is that you don't start by telling that this is the religion. Don't start that saying that this is design thinking, this is where it comes from, this is its definitions, this is what it's all about, because some people will just totally lock their brains from it. So the whole point is that how do you make them find these new ways of working on their own terms? And this, of course, has a lot of echoes back when we talked about shared meanings and the whole reification participation thing. You don't just bring stuff to the table and say, this is it, do it. But how do you kind of go in there and let people participate and create the reifications and all that? So it's kind of the whole core of Jari and myself and this facilitation course put into practice. So the first question again is this. Rather than going there and saying, oh, I need to tell these people about design thinking, is that why? Why do you as a facilitator think that this new way of thinking would help them? So if you think design thinking is the solution, what is their problem worth solving? What is the problem they identify? And then you bring a solution, rather than just bringing a solution on the table and assuming that everybody will fall in love with it. Step one, and this is, you can see the same themes coming over again in a different context. First, their own terms starts by making them clarify their own objectives. So imagine again, a team there, and you're the facilitator. So the first step is that clarifying that, what are the business objectives that you as a team are trying to achieve? What are the problems in the current ways of working, in the current processes that you want to solve? Let's make them clear. Let's make clear what are the real concrete things that we need to achieve the desired impact. And like I said earlier, and really emphasized that this is not a game part. Really emphasize typically that in this sense, it makes this whole thing that it's not just an exercise. So let's say we have the team and a workshop, and you come with a hoodie and maybe some Legos or colorful pencils or whatever. And they might be like, okay, this is some interesting exercise. This is not real work. So step one, make it real work. Bring in real objectives and real people trying to solve real problems. And the word there is accountability. When they start whatever exercise you use, they feel that I'm accountable. Whatever I write here as an answer, it should be pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm accountable for all the stuff I do. And really making people understand that we are solving real business challenges. And afterwards, when they kind of start seeing this design Lego hoodie fun thing, it makes it legitimate. And that, what I have there in the girly soft design blah, 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 is in quotation marks, because that's precisely how one person told me after a transformation program. He said that in the beginning, he said, at the end of the day, now I really understand how this girly soft design blah, blah, blah is actually useful. Nice, interesting fact. He did not change the definition girly soft design blah, blah, blah. But anyway, he found it very, very useful. Step two. So you have kind of brought accountability. You have kind of paved the way that this is a legitimate way of getting things done. Now remember, the biggest challenge typically is that people don't just meet customers enough. Remember, there are 6 things that stop people from doing it, and they're pretty strong. So what do you do first? And again, you're not saying anything about design thinking. You just say, hey, let's introduce a couple of customers. Let's get real users here. Literally get them into the same room. Do some kind of exercise. Use some tool, whatever. The world's full of them. Just make them interact, make them listen to these people, make them maybe use the current service. And you help them to listen. You say that, you need to be quiet. Just let's have a look how they do. Okay, you probably want to ask that question, and so forth. And kind of as a recap, it's really about the empathy. And the easy way to get empathetic is bring a real person there. Change the whole dynamic by having a real person who's a real customer. It is magic, no doubt about it. Sometimes I have that sentence over there. Well, when you talk about customer and listening to them, people sometimes, relatively often go like, everything you're telling is fine in the consumer market, but we are business to business. And well, most people who have worked in the business to business understand that the customers are very much human beings in a business to business scenario. So bringing them in and talking and listening to them is much more straightforward than if you just bring some random consumer. And like I said, not doing customer interviews is too easy. So just go and break it. Bring a real person, force them to talk with them. And now, after the two steps, first, they have clarified their objectives. So we are actually talking about real thing. This is real business problems. Second, real people. These are human beings. What? They can't, what? I never understood. This is how they use our product. One, clarifying objectives. Second, bring real customers. Third, now, introduce maybe some tools. Maybe them silly tools, if you will. Let them be creative. Make them brainstorm. Make them draw a sketch. Make them draw a customer journey. Let them taste the whole creativity part of it. Because I will guarantee that after meeting real people, they are emotionally loaded. That's how we humans work. But I would kind of not necessarily give the real objective yet, but just, go ahead. Okay, everybody's excited. We met real people. So, have a role play, do a mock-up, draw, paint, all that. Okay, this is a bit a heavy slide, but I mean, that really helps them to change the mindset. That you let them kind of loose before that, let them ride the initiative and the motivation. And getting, just as a facilitator, making sure that the mindset is going right, that they're actually solving things. That you kind of see that whether they are now actually solving problems for the real customer and not just doing what's told to them. Maybe they have a very strong hierarchy and you want to show that there's another way of doing it. And then see how they are doing decisions. Is there a decision maker or are they trying to find a consensus? And you can, as a facilitator, be very sensitive about these things. How's the team spirit? How's the psychological safety? Kind of making these little notes about how do they work once you have kind of got them started. And so forth. And the last, of course, is the energy levels and creativity. How do you manage that? Now that you see that they are excitedly doing something about, what can you add and what can you kind of make them unlearn? And once they have kind of tasted that creativity, maybe they have done one exercise where you kind of don't emphasize that this is for real. Just let them, after meeting real customers, just let them do what they want, kind of gently steering. But at some stage, you kind of go, okay, team, back here. Bring them back. Don't lose the inspiration, because pretty surely they are inspired at this moment. And saying, that was the warm-up. Now let's look at this wall where you wrote down the hard, difficult business objectives. Remember, that's where we started. Now take everything you just experienced with the real customers and with those creativity tools. And let's try to solve that business problem in the same way. So it becomes really that you hold on to the initiative by having a reflection in the end. You make them do it for real. And then, of course, you start discussing with them. So how will this change? Will you take this after this workshop or after this design sprint? How will this change the way you do your work? Have a follow-up in 1 week or two afterwards. And make sure that everything they do in the sprint is actually beneficial. And that's the whole point, that you start with real business objectives, is that when they create all that stuff, it is most probably very beneficial. And that's how you keep them motivated. And that's how you get the kind of the ball rolling and it doesn't stop immediately. Maybe you make them show their results to other people. Hey, let's go and get that other team here and you can show what you just did, and so forth. And kind of those are the 4 steps. And then the final step is that once they have realized that we had real business objects, real customers, we actually generated something interesting, and we did it in a very different way. This is not how we typically do that stuff. Then you might be brave enough to mention that, by the way, some people, what you did today, and you were all pretty much excited about it, some people call it design thinking. I don't know what you call it, but some people call it design thinking. And by the way, if you put design thinking on Google or you put design thinking in a library, there are these tools. There's this like decades of experience. You can just start using all that. This is what it's all about. But of course, the point being that now it is their design thinking. They went through the experience. They did it on their own terms, and their own terms being their own objectives, their own customers in a realistic context. And then you can introduce all the richness and everything that design thinking, or maybe it was agile development, or maybe it was Six Sigma Lean or something like that. There's this huge library of information for them to use. So that was a very kind of simple of thinking, but you can see the kind of the thinking behind here, that if you really are a facilitator, then you are in a different position. And I mean, like that person in that library picture over there, there are books and information and videos about how do you actually use these tools? How do you actually have a different mindset? But if you are the facilitator, then it's a little bit of a different angle. Because you're trying to, it doesn't mean that you believe in these methods. You have experience in these methods. You have that, you know how the thinking goes. But telling other people, trying to kind of make the whole participant, make it their own, is a bit of a different task. And that's again why I say call the midwife. Think yourself as the midwife. That you're not giving birth to this baby. Those people are giving birth to this baby. Sure, you can help them. And sure, you are very, very an important person and they really want you to be there. But at the end of the day, it's not your baby. It's going to be their baby. And I have this picture over here, or actually this slide here, is I have it in the reading list. Because one day after going like, hey, midwives, they're pretty cool. They're just like, change agents. Then I went and Googled what makes a good midwife. And I came up with this blog post. The link's going to be, you're going to get the link. And it's amazing. Read it. You can just totally change the word midwife into change agent and everything fits perfectly. And here are the 5 points that they make. That if you want to be a good midwife, you need to be a people person. Does it work for us as a facilitators? Yeah, you probably need to be a people person. You need to have good listening skills. Yeah, you need to have good listening skills. You need to be a problem solver. You need to, when something gets stuck, you're the one that goes like, identifies the problem and starts solving it. Mm-hmm. Ability to teach is important. And that's really close to the facilitation part. You probably need to introduce things to people. This is how you do clarify objectives. This is the reason why we use this tool. This is the thinking behind the tool, and so forth. And then last but not least, stay calm and carry on. People are going to go like, oh, in our organization, we can never do things like this. And you just stay calm and go, yeah, that's a challenge. But we don't have to solve it today. But let's write it down here on a post-it and get back to that. So have a look at it. It's going to be fun. And then I'm going to tell you about the last part is I'm going to tell you about this week's exercise. We actually have a couple of minutes to go. Let's see. Yeah, we have 15 minutes to go. So this week's exercise is going to be a continuation again from last week. So last week's exercise was all about you starting to look yourself as a facilitator. and you had to listen to the other people and think about the kind of the course experience and really listening and putting yourself in that context, what there is a facilitator and a person you're facilitating. Okay. So now this week, I'm going to make you a facilitator again. So it's going to be two people. The other person is going to get the task of designing or planning a workshop, whatever kind of a workshop for the organization that person works for. And your job is going to be facilitating that person. So that's the whole gist of this week's exercise. So a couple of notes I'm going to quickly show you, but you're going to get the slides anyway, so don't worry. So of course, what you probably going to facilitate for that other person is that you're going to be, asking questions such as, what do you think needs to be happening before the workshop? What do you think that is the desired impact? What happens after the workshop? And last but not least, or what happens during the workshop? I put kind of my this is my checklist. I'm just gonna share it with you. So thinking about before the workshop, the kind of questions, my checklist as a facilitator, or maybe just as a workshop organizer is this. So for example, the first one, why this workshop? What is it gonna solve? And so forth and so forth. A couple of trick questions. So you can use these as a facilitator or as the person planning the workshop. Another part, of course, is very practically during the workshop, planning the whole thing. How many hours, how many participants, what's the objective, what are their expectations, so forth and so forth. Schedules, breaks, food, that kind of stuff. But also I put here stuff that Jari talked about, kind of Jari's checklist about sensitivity during the workshop. As a facilitator, what are your eyes and ears open? So kind of bringing these also into that during the workshop, you need to be able to tweak things and go there. So how are you going to plan for these? How are you going to be prepared as the person running the workshop? And then again, kind of another level, how are you going to facilitate the person running the workshop to be ready about this? And then, of course, afterwards, what's going to happen after the workshop? Again, sparring questions and all that. Yeah, I put that quotation there in the end. At the end of the day, the sprint or the workshop serves a bigger cause. Again, you can see that the onion is haunting there in the background. The temporal onion is pretty much what this is all about. So, if you're planning a workshop, you're planning a sprint, you're planning a project, there's always a bigger cause. And that's what happens in the aftermath. So here are the actual kind of the lists. So you have two roles. Role A, you're in charge of planning a one-day workshop in your organization. So again, when you are in role A, think about, where do I work? What's the organization? What kind of workshop I think they would need? And then start planning. And now you have next to you is somebody in role B who's going to be like, oh, okay, tell me about it. So what kind of a workshop? Oh, interesting. How are you going to think about this? So you're actually kind of planning it together, but the other person is definitely more as a facilitator and the more as the person responsible for it. And then you switch roles. Simple as that. And the questions is that the reflection part, when you kind of stop the role play as a pair and you get together, now you really look at the facilitation part of it. Focus on that. So first, you're going to reflect 5 minutes alone about the facilitation. Now you have been the facilitator and you have been the person being facilitated. So you have kind of both views of it. And then, discuss learnings, observations as a facilitator, observations as the person being facilitated. And now you actually have a concrete thing, concrete job to do. And then return your bullets in the email. And this is actually, and you can see that now we're more going towards next week. And next week, we're going to talk about your personal style, your own skills as a facilitator. Going to go more into that. Good. I have never been this early. Makes me concerned that A, I didn't give you enough time in a breakout room. B, I've been talking too fast. Maybe both. So a couple of notes before you leave. I know I can already hear everybody just going. Oh, I don't have a poll. We need to do that poll. So while I do the poll, you can see definitely I'm going to do multitasking. So not much about reading today. I encourage you to look at the lean service creation, because that was really that was what we have been, oops, this went into, no, we can't create the poll at least and talk at the same time. So look at lean service creation. That is a toolbox that is pretty wide that I did with a few colleagues of mine. It is free, it is for download, and it has kind of this facilitation aspect as well. Have a read at that Midwife blog post. That's the one in the middle. I might add a couple of videos. I had a few in mind for this lecture, so I'll put them into the webpage. And note, importantly, we are migrating to Medium. That Aalto blog was terrible. Nobody liked it. If you liked it, send us a message. You'll be the only one on the planet. So we actually have now migrated to Medium, which is very convenient, and so forth and so forth. And you can see all the previous lectures already there. We're going to bring all the videos there couple in the next week and so. And that's going to be where this course is going to be for the rest of eternity. So so we're going to make this into a package that you can reuse, or you can tell your friends and colleagues to go and self-educate, if you will. So next week, talk about meta skills, personal style, like I mentioned. Now you can mark your participation like some fast people have already done.